and settled in. Well, thank you for coming, Will. I appreciate it.
No problem. Yeah.
So I guess we'll kind of just jump right into it.
Yeah.
What kind of got you started investing in real estate? What got you started?
So, by way of introduction, my name is Will Frederick. I'm a real estate agent, real estate investor, and I have some other real estate related businesses. First, let me compliment John. Great job on this. I love stats too, and this is really informative and helpful for folks. So, yeah, no problem. So, I guess from the time I was 12 years old, I've always known I wanted to be my own boss because I'm kind of bossy. So, I knew that was the track, but I didn't know what I was going to do. And I went to a college in Virginia, graduated with business, and went to work for Rubbermaid to learn on somebody else's dime for a little bit. While I was up there, I kind of accidentally flipped a house. I bought a house that needed some work, just kind of didn't have much of a life. I lived in a small town in Virginia, so I was like, let me just do something to be productive. So I worked on this house in the evenings, and about a year later, I went to sell the house, and as a 22, 23-year-old, I left that closing with a check for $27,000, and I just thought I had hit the lottery, man. I was just like, this is amazing. And that's when real estate bug bit me. Right around that time, I had read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is one of the best books I'd highly recommend by Robert Kiyosaki. And I kind of began to formulate, okay, real estate is kind of my vein. Wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do totally, but I knew I wanted to be a real estate investor. Fast forward a little bit, moved back home. I'm originally from New Orleans. My parents had moved to Hammond while I was out of state in college. When I settled here, I started doing mortgages for a little while, worked for NOLA Lending when NOLA Lending was much smaller than it is now. Got fired because I'm no good at lending, and realized that I needed to be in a different form of real estate. After a couple of years of kind of managing, I had begun to buy some investment property and was managing my own investment property, and then decided to become a licensed real estate agent. That was 16 years ago. So that's kind of the beginnings of the real estate.
So what were your first few deals like? So your first property was really a flip. It wasn't much of a rental for you, was it?
Yeah, so those were kind of, I guess you would call them live-in flips now. So I bought a house, lived in it for a year, and sold it a year later. Was actually going to move home. I got fired from Rubbermaid too, by the way. So when I got fired, I was going to move back home to Louisiana, put my house up for sale, and that's when I sold it, and found another job up there that was a good job, and I had begun to make friends up there, so I was like, I could stay up here for a little bit longer. Always knew I wanted to be back home in Louisiana. But so I bought another house and did another live-in flip for the next year. And then a year later, I sold that one, made a similar sum of money. I don't remember that check as much, but I think it was maybe a little bit more, a little bit less. And then came home to Louisiana, bought in Hammond an old house that's a triplex. Well, that was, actually it was a fourplex. Lived in the upstairs part of it and rented out the downstairs 3 units, so house hacking before that was a term, I think. Maybe it was a term. And I still own that property today on 311 East Robert Street in Hammond. So that was, to kind of explain how I think sometimes this balloons. So I took my proceeds from those first 2 flips, had a decent down payment for this house, added a lot of value, fixed it up, did some of the work myself, and used the equity from that house, once it got up and running, to buy another 3 little dumpy rentals in Hammond. I started in very low-end investment property. So, and then it just kind of kept going from there.
Why Hammond? What made you choose Hammond?
Well, my parents had moved to the sticks, is what I thought it was. I grew up in River Ridge in New Orleans and really loved it. So when my parents moved to Hammond, I was like, what are y'all doing? Y'all ruined our lives, And so when I came back home to visit and be by my family, I don't think I'd ever even been to Hammond. I just knew it was the sticks. And so I really kind of was like, oh, it's not as bad as I was thinking it was. It was like almost 20 years ago now. So just kind of started to like it, and my parents were there and my siblings were there, and I was like, all right, well, this is not too bad. That's why I started there.
So you're kind of self-managing your rentals, house hacking before it was really a thing, before it was a term. How did that lean into becoming a real estate agent? What came first?
So I was definitely in the investor mindset first. That's where my primary love is. It always has been my first thing. I kind of got into it because, well, my wife, I met and married my wife, met her right after Hurricane Katrina. We were doing relief work at a local shelter together. She was actually coming in to get her, pick up a friend, and they were going to go get their nails done. She wasn't working, but I was working. And so after that, like, we got married shortly thereafter, and she was a school teacher, so I had the luxury of her income being more stable, and I could kind of do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, odd jobs and whatever. And so managing rentals, doing work on the rentals. Well, we got pregnant for my oldest daughter, who's now about to be 16, and I had to go get a real job. And so I was doing all this stuff. I was going to be a school bus driver for the insurance, and I was going to teach part-time at Southeastern and get my agent's license, because you can do that and a bunch of other things. And after just a few weeks as a real estate agent, I realized, like, if I really focused my efforts on real estate, I could really do well in that vein, because I really loved it. I already had some knowledge, and real estate is also just being a real estate agent is like juggling. Like, you're doing like 15 different things. So I thought real estate agent was going to be one thing, and I was going to juggle all the other things, but real estate agent by itself is enough like juggling, that I was like, okay, I just need to juggle just this and not everything. So that's kind of what led me to say I need to focus here, and so that was, like I said, about 16 years ago.
Mm-hmm. So you had these properties first before becoming an agent. How were you finding these deals?
I found my first deal in Hammond, and the two in Virginia. I found my first deal in Hammond, though, through a real estate agent, Kathy Holly. I don't know if you know Kathy Holly. She's a long-time agent in Tangipahoa Parish. She was my agent before I was an agent. She found me this deal. We negotiated on this house on Robert Street, and I remember she came to me, because we kind of lowballed them a little bit. She came to me and she said, "Look, Will, this is the price. If you don't sign this, I'm gonna sign it, because it's a really good deal." And I was like, "Oh wow, that is a good deal." So I bought it, and so I think the first few deals, because I feel like the three that I bought right after that were through another agent. So I found a lot of my deals through agents. It's an interesting question. I hadn't really thought about it, but yeah.
Can you remember any numbers or anything, rough numbers for like your first kind of rental deal?
What do you mean, like how much the rent was?
Yeah, what rent was, what you bought it for, what we think it's worth now.
Yeah, so my house on Robert Street, I think I got it for, it's about a 4,000 square foot house. I got it for, I want to say it was like 108,000, which, now it's like, oh my gosh, that's ridiculously cheap. And it really was at the time too. But we're talking, almost 20 years ago. I closed on that house on December 31st, 2003. So that was a long time ago, and the market wasn't what it is right now. That was before the run up, kind of like the crazy time. Like a corollary now, like to John's point earlier, like corollary now would be like COVID. Right before COVID, back in 2018, it was kind of like normal, and then COVID went crazy. So this was right before the normal of the 04, 5, 6, and 7 in our areas. Yeah. But I think I rented out, so I lived upstairs, and I rented out the downstairs. I can't remember all those numbers, but it was, I remember living for free and making a few $100s a month, and that was pretty cool.
That's great.
The three that I bought I think I bought all three in the East Iowa edition, two on Mary Street and one on Park. Those three I bought for $92,000, and they were renting for like $450, $500 each. And they were like pretty rough, And in fact, before I knew what the heck I was doing, I even put a roof on one of them. Me and my brothers, I conned them into, like, we were up there with like one of those how-to manuals, like on the peak of the roof, like shingling and doing this. And the roof looked pretty bad, but it was airtight or watertight, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So how did that snowball into what you have now? Because if I'm not mistaken, you have a bunch of commercial properties, a bunch of residential properties, you have a property management company, a construction. It's turned into something much larger. How did that? Because a lot of people have done their first deal, done two deals, but they're kind of struggling to get traction to kind of get past that.
Yeah, that middle ground is kind of hard. The beginning ones were, I won't say easy, but I was kind of like, before I met and married my wife, like it was just me, and I'm very, very risk tolerant. Like I do stuff that I would probably be uncomfortable if one of my kids started to do, now. But at the time I had very little to lose, so I was like, let me just do it, And so it was nice because my wife is highly risk averse, and we probably, when we got married, I was like, this is what we're doing. So if you want on board, like, just know what you're getting into. And she did, and she's happy she did. Thank God. So, the question was like, how did I get to here? So I think over time, like I just tried to figure out the most efficient way. I would look for good deals. I was always like good deals. So I would find deals. And one of the things I think I missed out on, especially as an agent, lack of creativity. Like I'm not a very creative person. And so I missed out on some good opportunities that look back now that I didn't see the opportunity in them, that if I knew then what I know now, I'm like, man, I could have done this with that person. I could have done that, help them in this way. But I think just trying, I'm very driven. I'm a very focused and very, I'm just a determined person. And I knew my end goal, I really, really wanted to be financially free, have passive income, and so that was my goal. So I was always looking for a path to get there. I guess as things developed, the first few years of real estate were kind of, a little iffy. I got licensed in 2008, which was a terrible time to get into the real estate business. But I didn't know any better, and I just went in and hustled and started making some money after a couple years in that. Meanwhile, I was still buying investment properties, figuring out different ways to do that. And I've continued to buy, but I'll tell people, like, it was very much gradually, then suddenly. So like in the last few years, I have about 145 units right now that I own personally. And the last probably 4 or 5 years, I'm investing for almost 20 years now, actually over 20 years, but the last 4 or 5 years I bought probably 80 of those units. I do almost exclusively multifamily now. Like the last 3 I bought were like a 28-plex, a 16-plex, and a 36-plex. Those are my last 3 purchases over the last 4 or 5 years. So that almost like pretty much doubled my unit holding. So it wasn't like overnight I have 150 units, but as it grew, and actually I was listening. Anybody listen to Bigger Pockets podcast? I was actually listening to it this morning, and David Green said something really cool that I was like, that's kind of how I thought about it. Like people would begin to ask me, because they knew I managed my own rental property, and they were like, hey, Will, would you manage mine too if I bought some property and managed? I said, oh yeah, sure, because I'm always like, whatever the client needs, like I'll figure out a way to make it happen. And it was a little too much, like I'm like a little bit too nice to manage property, like I let people get away with stuff. And so after a while, after my wife was sick and tired of hearing me tell all the tenant stories to her, which is why we don't have rent, because this is what's going on with this tenant. She's like, look, we need to do something different, And so I hired a property manager to help manage for our owners and me, so to get me out of the middle of it. And so it kind of happened just by need. Need arose, and I figured out a way to fill a need. So I hired a property management person, and that wasn't Emily. Emily Canavier runs Rent Louisiana now. That's our management company, and we manage about 350 units in Hammond, including mine. And so that's kind of become its own little arm of the business. And what I always look to do is provide value for my clients and provide solutions for their problems. So it's great to be able to say, hey, I don't manage property, but here's Emily, she does. Or we manage property, yeah, here you go, here's Emily. Same thing, same reason I started a construction company, because I needed a lot of work, and I just was like, man, I bought that 28-plex I talked about. It needed a whole lot of work. Some of y'all might know, if y'all are familiar with Hammond, it's in Ponchatoula, down across from the new Strawberry Manor. It's those apartments across the street from that. And like 5 years ago when I bought them, they needed a ton of work, and I was going to buy them, and the tenants were kind of like not great tenants. So I was going to one at a time, like kick out a tenant and then renovate that unit and just make them nicer slowly over time. And we got into it. We started cracking down. Emily started cracking down on the tenants and like holding them accountable and kicking out drug dealers, mean stuff like that. And all of a sudden we had like 10 vacancies, and I was like freaking out. I was like, I can't, I had one full-time guy, and I was like, it's going to take me a year. So that's when I decided, all right, I have to start hiring teams and crews. So it was primarily out of my need. And then Ida hit, and then everybody needed construction, myself included, because I had a bunch of damaged property. And so, so again, it's just meeting needs and finding where you can add value to people's lives. And I think that's where that's kind of how I've gotten to where I am. So.
When was that handoff to management? How many units were you at? What point were you like, okay, I gotta figure this out?
We were at about 25 units, and I was like, I actually enlisted my wife because when we got pregnant, she was a school teacher, and we had decided we wanted her to be a stay-at-home mom. And so I was like, oh, you have free time? Here's the rental property phone, and she got to talk to tenants, and which she really hated, and so after a while we were like, this isn't working out. Like, I need to hire a person, and I think it was like about 25 units. I think maybe 20 were mine and maybe 5 for other people. So we had started to manage other people's units at that time. In fact, one of those early clients was none other than John Exnicius.
Oh, really? Okay.
Has he?
He was here in February.
Okay, yeah. So
yeah.
John's a really good friend and an early client. He doesn't like people to tell people that I was his agent before he was an agent, but I always do that just to mess with him.
So you told him everything he knows.
Everything, yeah.
He doesn't credit me for getting him into real estate, but he does credit me for getting him into investing. So I'll take it.
So how are you generally finding these deals, especially these apartment complexes and stuff like that? And then how are you financing them? What does that generally look like?
So I've actually, the cool thing about what I've learned from Courtney and the RIA and all this stuff is the opportunity for seller financing. I have not used seller financing extensively until just a few years ago. So most of my stuff has been traditional financed. I do a lot of I do a HELOC on my home and use that as a down payment. And then I got to a certain point where I couldn't buy regular 30-year mortgage loans. I had to do the 20-year, like the commercial financing, because they made a rule where if you had more than 10 loans, you were considered commercial, even if you were buying a regular residential. I think that law's gone away now, but I've just become comfortable with more like 20-year financing at traditional finance banks.
With a balloon, or?
Yeah, most of the time they have a balloon, which is a real big pain. I just that project.
How have you been pivoting with that? Has anything come up recently that you're like, ooh?
Well, my cash flow right now is to the point that it's very healthy, so I can absorb a lot of changes. There have been a lot of changes, like that one on Highway 51 in Ponchatoula. That one just came off of a 3-year lock at 5% and went to 9 1/8. So my cash flow decreased by like $2,800 a month, which thank God I'm able to absorb that, because at the same time the insurance tripled on it and went from 30-something thousand a year to $100,000 a year. Yeah, so pretty big cash flow hits this last year with Ida. But like I said, I'd gotten to the point where it was such a big snowball that I'm still okay. I'm not like about to drown or anything like that. I still have my other business too, real estate sales and stuff like that.
What does insurance look like for you? Do you have individual policies on each property, or do you have like one policy that covers them all?
I just changed, so I've done both. A few years ago, I decided to get a big policy that was like just a blanket master policy, and that actually, I think that was pretty efficient for a while. But what I just recently did is change that policy because I thought with the changes with Ida, I thought it would be more efficient to do just individualized policies. And it was a pain in the behind because I had to go through with my insurance agent, just like it was a lot of work. But it did save me maybe $25,000 a year, so significant. So I think right now, the insurance situation in our state is pretty bad. I'm really hoping that something happens because, yeah, it's put a significant crimp in my in my plans. So.
Do you have any other types of commercial property? Is it just apartments, or do you have industrial or triple net, anything like that? Or?
I don't. I've toyed with getting into that several times. I do have a few small commercial rentals in downtown Hammond on East Charles Street. I have. There's like 9 storefronts on that block, and I own 6 of them. That's actually where Rent Louisiana is located, 215 East Charles Street. And so I have that. I've looked at strip centers before, looked at warehouses. In fact, I did have a warehouse for a little while, and it was in Kentwood, and I ended up selling it to somebody and made some good money on it. But so I've looked at doing that kind of thing, more like triple net, like low touch. But I have done a good bit of buyer or seller financing, because I like buying. Now on seller financing, one of my first questions for my sellers, real estate, or if I'm looking at a deal, I'll ask them if they'll consider seller financing. And sometimes they need to be educated about what that looks like. I did just do, I have a podcast, the Will Frederick Podcast. It's on YouTube. And this last episode that came out maybe a couple weeks ago, I just drop them once a month, but I interviewed Courtney on owner financing or seller financing. It was a really good episode. I think got a lot of good feedback because it's a really great tool, and I like it as a seller as well. Some of the best deals I've done, maybe not financially like huge deals, but just really creative deals. And I said I haven't done it widely until recently, but these were like probably 10 years ago. I did some seller finance deals, and some of those people still pay me today, and it's really awesome. Like, I really enjoy that, and it's like I look at it as like cash flow without getting any calls, which is nice. So.
Do you have a favorite deal that you've done to date?
Yeah, and like I said, this one's not the most. Well, I'll tell 2 deals. One's kind of a small deal, but it was just really one of my favorites. And the other one's a big deal, but the small deal was this house I bought. I was just kind of, one day I was thinking, like, I want to buy something like real cheap. I wonder how cheap I can find something. So I put a search in the MLS, everything under $30,000 or whatever. There was a $6,000 house in a neat, and it was like a burned out shell in a terrible neighborhood, and I was like, I wonder if I should buy that. And so I offered them $4,000. And they came back with $5,000. I said, all right, I'll take it. And I was like, now what am I going to do with this house? Like, I don't want to put money into it because it's not a great area. And I think it was somebody else's idea, but I just put a sign, just a regular. I was an agent, but I didn't list it. I just put this for sale by owner sign in the yard. Owner financing available, $29,900, $199 a month, $5,000 down. And it took me about, it took me about 4 months, but I got $5,000 down, and for like 10 years, that lady's been paying me $200 a month.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I keep on trying to convince her to refi it out, because I think I have her at like 12% or something like that. And I'm like, hey, look, you go to the bank, and I don't care if she does or not. I just want to help her. But yeah, so that was one of my best deals, because I'm like, oh my gosh, that was like a free deal, $200 a month for 10 years. So that's one of my favorite deals, just because it's cool,
Mm-hmm.
She made improvements to the property.
Yeah, she lives there. It doesn't actually look a whole lot better from the outside, but somebody lives there. So I've been by there a couple times. I haven't been there very often, but.
How do you normally like to sell, on a lease option or a bond for deed? Do you have a particular
Yeah,
strategy that you
I actually don't sell a whole lot, but when I do sell, I like to sell on a seller finance deal like that. Just because it's cash flow.
Yeah.
Cash flow has always been my game. Like I said, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I was like, that is the idea, Yeah. And so I've always tried to figure out the best way to maximize cash flow from properties. Which is why, by the way, here's a bit of advice. In the beginning, I started with very low-end properties because it looked good on paper, the cash flow, the ROI, the initial investment. However, with all the rent chasing, with all the quality of tenants you get, like I always tell people, you want to bait the hook with the type of fish in mind that you want to catch. And if you want to, I remember when I met Rhonda, my wife, her apartment complex was a really nice apartment complex on the corner of Old Covington and Range Road, is where she lived. And every month, her landlord would come in on the 1st. Her rent check was supposed to be on the table. The landlord would change the filter and pick up the rent check. And he would just go to all 12 units there and do that. And I already had rental property at the time, but it wasn't like my tenants were not people that would just leave that, like it wasn't working like that. It was like they're dodging me and I had to go hunt them down, and they met them at work and, waited outside and their bosses would run me off. Yeah, it was a nightmare. So, and I was like, man, I need to rent to people that are like responsible, like human beings, like my wife, but realized that my wife would never be caught dead in one of the apartments that I owned, And so I realized that even though the ROI looked good on paper, by the time you got done with all the foolishness of rent collection and the repairs that these people if you get a crappy apartment, the only type of tenant that's going to live in a crappy apartment is a crappy tenant, And that's how they're going to treat their stuff, because that's how you gave it to them. It's not all their fault. It's you got the type of fish that you baited the hook with, right? And so when I recognized that, I started to cycle out of my low-end properties and get stuff that was nicer in better areas, where people that were like me, like people like I would live there, And so I think that's a really important thing. It's a lot harder to get into those in the beginning because it costs a little bit more. They're nicer. But if you look at the long-term capital, the appreciation of the property, a lot of my properties that were low-end, like I cash flowed for a while, but they didn't go up in value by the time I sold them. And after I put all the money into them and that I did, and the area just didn't support great appreciation. So I was like, well, that's I got out and I still made money because I cash flowed it and I got out what I put into it, but I didn't get a whole lot more. Now I'm watching some of the properties that I have fixed up and added value to, and some that I haven't, some that I just bought and left them how they are, and they're increasing in value, so.
I know your main metric is cash flow, but do you have like a favorite way or a spreadsheet or a certain thing that you use to analyze a deal? Say you get this deal come across your desk, what are you looking at?
I do. I have a spreadsheet that I created, and actually, not to shamelessly plug my podcast, but the time before Courtney's, I think it's episode 12, I go through that spreadsheet, and it's downloadable. Like you can download it from the YouTube link, and I kind of made it customized so like you could use it, and there's a couple little instructions. I created it so it's like not super high tech or fancy, but it's very usable, and I still use it when I'm evaluating a deal. And what I do is I kind of keep those, even if I don't do the deal, I keep them so I can go back and refer to them and say, man, I didn't do that deal because of this, but this deal's, not as good as that. So if I didn't do that one, I probably shouldn't do this one, And it's good for like I have a bad memory, so historically it's good for me to be able to compare my ideas with what I was thinking then,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Do you have like a specific challenging deal that you did and something you did to overcome it?
So this is you asked a couple times about how I found deals, and one thing I've learned is that if you can be more creative, the deals are out there. Like I said, like that $5,000 house, and my brother teases me, he's like, oh yeah, he just went to the $5,000 house store and bought a house, and that deal was on the market for a long time. Like, it was out there. Nobody just saw the potential and did it. The same thing for those apartments in Ponchatoula. I had a pocket listing. This is the big deal that I was going to tell you about. So I had a pocket listing on that deal, and I tried to sell that. He didn't want to put a sign out front and spook the tenants and stuff. I was trying to sell that for $1.25 million, and I had a pocket listing on it for 8%. So 4 to me, 4 to the buyer's agent. So I'm calling all kinds of people for probably a year plus, just kind of needle in a haystack approach, calling other agents. Hey, who do you have that would, oh, it's a big project, Well, I found out in the course of this that the seller would be willing to, and I hadn't asked him, this was before I asked everybody about seller financing. I found out that he'd be willing to do a seller second. which I don't know if y'all know what a seller second is, but that's the bank. The bank will lend you 80% if you bring 20% down, right? Well, in the seller second situation, it's very rare because it's a little risky for the seller, but the seller lends you the 20%, and you're paying him a note on the 20, and you're paying the bank a note on the 80. The bank doesn't care because they're in first position lien, so if you stop paying, they get rid of the seller, his 20% doesn't matter, and they can keep that. So I realized he would do that, and I said, man, would you do that for me? Like, you know, if I did that deal, would you do it? And but I had told other people about it. Like, I'd pitched it to several people, and a lot of my deals, I pitched to people. I'm like, you need to do this deal, you need to do this deal, and everybody's like, no, it's too risky. And I pitch it so many times, and I'm listening the whole time. So I'm like, I need to do that deal because it's such a good deal.
Sold yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
It's weird how that has happened several times, but so I found out he would do the seller second, and if anybody's done the math on 1.25 million at 8% commission, that's $100,000. And I said, hey, well, what about? I said, you know, I think I'd like to do that. I said, well, what about the commission? Will you still pay me the commission? We said, yeah, I was going to pay it to anybody, so I paid it to you, of course. So I got in 0 down, borrowed 80 from the bank, borrowed 20 from him, and he paid me a $100,000 commission. And that deal, I'm telling y'all, I'm probably about to refi it, and I don't know what it's going to appraise for, but I probably put $500,000 into it, since 1.25 is what I bought it for, and it'll probably appraise for 2.25, maybe 2.5 is what I'm kind of hoping for. So that's one of those, again, nothing down deals. With that one, I made $100,000.
You got paid to do that.
Yeah, I got paid to do that one, and I'm still getting paid. I mean, I've increased the rents. The gross rents were like $13,000 a month when I bought it. Now they're a little over 20, and there's still some upside potential there. So that was a really good deal. So that's one of my favorite deals. Again, like I said, the $5,000 house one is my favorite one, just because it's kind of just like a free house, you know. But this one is too.
So that's in Hammond or Tangipahoa?
The $5,000 house.
The apartments.
Yeah, the apartments.
Yeah.
That's on Highway 51. Yeah.
Okay. So everything is in Tangi, or do you own anything else in other parishes?
Yeah, no, everything I own is in Tangipahoa Parish. Yeah,
Gotcha.
Hammond or Ponchatoula. So.
What do you see in the market in Tangipahoa, like buying, selling, rents over the last few years? In the future, what do you think?
So I really like Tangi. Number one, it's right where I am, and I'm a big fan of downtown Hammond. I've been through Leadership Tangipahoa. I'm really plugged in Hammond. I really love it. Great people, great vibe. And one of the things, like, I was remarking about John's spreadsheet here, because I think Tangipahoa has always been like a really stable market. I love the growth potential there. You've got sprawl coming from Baton Rouge, from New Orleans, and from St. Tammany, because St. Tammany is just too full, behind probably 10 years in infrastructure catching up to the population growth. Tangipahoa, in kind of a weird blessing type of way, has been held back by its disadvantaged school systems. The growth hasn't been as strong. They're fixing that, but they've been able to proactively do a lot of good infrastructure there that has been able to manage the growth. And so you referenced a lot of the building that's going on over there. We're still at an inventory deficit right now. Like, we still need inventory. And I think our long-term population growth is really good. The college really kind of displaces normal rental demand of a town that size. So I find the rental demand has always been really strong, and it's gone up a lot since Ida, especially. Like, I've seen rents increase just in the last few years. Like, I never thought I'd be, charging what I'm charging for some of those apartments. So I'm a big fan of St. Tammany too. Like, I do business in both areas as an agent, and there's a lot of good things about the North Shore. But like Hammond's, even though the price point's a little bit lower from a sales perspective, it's not as beneficial to sell houses there as it is in St. Tammany or New Orleans or Baton Rouge. But I just like it, it's the people I know.
So like, as an agent and as an investor, how do you kind of pivot with the market? Like, market changes, How do you respond to those both as an agent?
So I think it's easy to say, like, in every challenge there lies an opportunity, right? Like, that's like a thing that you read in motivational books and stuff like that. And it's, and most of the time, like, that's what I'm gonna say right now, like, in every challenge is an opportunity. And it's true. It's hard to believe that, though, especially when you're in the thick of the challenge. You're like, oh my gosh, like this NAR, like the commission thing, everybody's like, oh my gosh, and it's scary looking, right? However, I truly believe in every challenge there is an opportunity. And I think it's Warren Buffett that says, be greedy when other people are scared and scared when other people are greedy. So I feel like the last few years, it's been pretty easy to make money in real estate, and everybody's kind of like, you know, spoiled with it a little bit, and you know, we're looking at it and like, now it's like, oh my gosh, it's tough, it's tough. I got into real estate in 2008. Like I said, the worst time to get into real estate. And that's when I really built a good foundation. I was buying property then. I was selling property then as a real estate agent. And so I think if you just white knuckle it through and figure out how to add value in any market, how to just provide solutions for your clients, you're gonna figure out how to win, how to succeed. And so I try to tell myself in challenges there lie opportunities, because it is hard to believe that, but I just kind of condition my mind and say, I know there's an opportunity here. What are the ways that I can be greedy when other people are scared? And then when everybody's like, oh, you can make all this money doing all this stuff, I succumbed to it. I started doing Airbnbs, right? I wish I hadn't. It's been okay, but
You still have them? Or?
Yeah, I still have. I just decided to put one of them back in the long term. I have two still. Yeah, and I'm going to let them ride for a little bit. But even when everybody was talking about Airbnbs and how much money they could make and all this stuff, I was like, that's, you know, it's probably a fad. That's going to last. I'm just going to stick with my long term. But eventually it wore me down. I was like, I'm just going to try it and see what happens, you know. And it was actually John, my ex-nicious, he had this rent, you know, he had an Airbnb downtown. He was telling me about it and blah, blah. I'm like, man, I could do that. I got some downtown rentals. I don't even have to build them like he did. And so I got into it, and you know, and it's been okay, but it hasn't been, you know, it hasn't been worth it, I don't think, you know. So, but that's what I would say to adapting to challenging times. I mean, if you have the will to do it, you will figure it out, you know. That's what I would say.
Do you have any long-term goals with your real estate business as an agent and investor? What does that look like for you?
So I'd almost reached my long-term goals, which is like basically my passive income exceeding my my lifestyle expenses, and then insurance has tripled, and and all this other stuff happened. So it kind of set me back a little bit. I'm trying to figure out right now the level I've gotten to. I'm trying to figure out how much deeper I want to go into it, and I think I'll still keep going because so we homeschool, and my youngest daughter I have 5 kids. My youngest daughter is almost 8, and so we have a good while to where I can't just go play in Europe with my wife for like a month and a half. You know, we still have like responsibilities here, and I like what I do. I really love real estate, so selling real estate, growing my team, growing my other real estate related businesses. It's not like a chore to me. It's fun. I'd rather be traveling with my wife or my family, but we're not at that stage right now. Homeschool makes it easier, so we can kind of up and go whenever we want, but we still live a pretty structured life. So I would say, like, my goal is to continue to buy, you know, income properties. I will recommend a good book that I'm rereading right now. It's called The 5-Day Weekend. And it's he talks a lot about your passive income ratio, and that's a concept that I remember really liking when I first read that a couple of years ago, and now I'm coming back to it. I reread books a lot because I'll forget what was in them, and so I'll go back to them. And I read a lot, by the way. I think that's a really good habit because you learn a lot. But he talks about like getting your passive income ratio, which is your passive income versus your expenses. To first step is 1, get it to 1, like it completely absorbs your expenses. Then get it to 2. Then when you get it at 2, then you can kind of like ease off the other stuff and just concentrate on being creative, like getting creative with bigger deals. And it's kind of like Robert Kiyosaki's idea of getting out of the rat race. If you've ever played the game Cash Flow 101, your passive income exceeds your expenses, then you're out of the rat race. Then you can go do the big deals. So the big deals are things that, I mean, I've already done a few of them, but I want to get to the point where that's all I'm doing, because I think it's a lot of fun, and it's also less pressure. It's not like I gotta produce, I gotta, do the deal,
And what does that look like for you? Is that in Hammond, or is that syndications, or do you know yet?
Syndications have always been interesting to me, because I'm like, I don't know if I want to own something that, like, I'm like I said, I don't like partners a whole lot. Like, I just like it to be me, and that's partially because I think I'm probably not a easy person from a partnership standpoint to get along with. Like, I like it my way. And then other property, like outside of here, I mean, I've thought about vacation rentals, like in other countries, like buying a place like in Mexico or something like that. But a friend of mine is now selling, actually I do have this business partner, we do a little bit of land development stuff, but he's got a house in Seagrove, Seaside, and he was just telling me how great it was, but he's selling it now because he realized that, like, every quarter he's got to go, and it's a work trip. Like, he stays for a week, and he's got some cabins in Arkansas too. He does the same thing. So he's like 4 weeks in Seaside, 4 weeks in Arkansas, and that's not like fun trip. That's like go and repair stuff and clean stuff, because even though you have a cleaner, they're not gonna clean it like you clean it. You're not gonna keep it like you. So he's actually selling that. So I'm like, maybe I'll just rent my vacations. Maybe I'll just always like stay in different places, because we like this place in Fort Walton called Waterscape. It's a great family place to go stay, and we've been going there for like 10 years every week. And every September we go for 1 week. And every time I go, I'm like, run the numbers on buying a condo at the beach, because I'm like, we go every year, and I'm in rental property, like I should do this. And every time I run the numbers, I'm like, I could just buy like 2 or 3 rentals, cash flow, and just rent my vacation. Then I don't have to go to Waterscape if I don't want to. I can go to wherever I want, We still go to Waterscape, but I could go somewhere else too. So I don't know. Like, it's interesting to find. I think after I get through this insurance thing, I'll figure out what I really want to do next. But once I get that cash flow back, hopefully the insurance situation will correct.
You have any insider info on the insurance deal?
No, I wish I did.
No.
Not too many of my insurance people will speak to me right now, just because I'm so, not really, but I'm friends with them, but I'm aggravated with them.
So you have all these real estate related businesses.
Mm-hmm.
How do you maintain a work-life balance with that? Seems like you have such a busy schedule.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of my core values is money value of time. So I try to quantify my dollar per hour, and if I can pay somebody anything less than what my time is valued at, then I do that. And that's how you buy time, because time is the most limited resource, the most valuable thing that we have. And my big why is freedom, as defined by time with family. So went to Brickfest in Baton Rouge with my son and played Legos all day Saturday this past week. That's really what I want to do with my time. And so I try to spend a lot of time with my family. My daughters that are almost 16 and 14 right now, they're not too into the daddy dates anymore. It's like they're teenage girls. So, but I still try to like drive them to their LA and horseback and stuff like that, so we can have those. My wife and I were just talking actually right before I got here. On her way, she was bringing one of our daughters back from horseback, and she had this like really good conversation about like, what you're going to do with your life in college. And I think one of the guys, a friend of mine's father in college, he told me, he said, how you spell love, Will? And I said, no, how you spell it? He said, Time. And spending time with people, that's how you, because there's conversations you want to have with your kids that you just, you can try to make it happen, but they might not be ready when you're ready, and you might not be ready when they're ready. But if you have time, if you spend time with them, you're gonna, those 2 things are gonna align, and you're gonna get to spend time with them. So work-life balance is very important. It's God, family, business. Those are my priorities, and I fight very hard to keep them that way. I've had to take a step back from some things. I just I love being involved with a lot of social things in Hammond, like Rotary, but I just took a step back from Rotary because I was like, it's just too much. I got to figure out how to pare down my life. Rhonda's really good at helping me with that. She is very big on margin. I am very big on, if there's 5 minutes, I'm going to figure out how to squeeze 7 minutes worth of stuff into that 5 minutes. And that's been really, I've learned to not do that, or I'm learning. Let me put it that way. I'm learning not to do that. So I think it's just trying to tell myself there's a lot of good things in the world, and I can't do all of them. Like, there's good, there's better, and there's best. And what do I focus on that is the best thing? And I can't do all the good things, even though I want to, but there's not 6 of me, there's just 1 of me. And so I don't know if that's like advice. I don't know if there's anything profound. I'm still figuring out how to have a good work-life balance, but I find it very important to get help, get leverage in my life. For the real estate agents in the room, I'd highly recommend The Millionaire Real Estate Agent by Gary Keller. It talks a lot about leverage and how to build your business around not doing it all yourself. I've learned a lot from that book. I've grown a lot personally from that book because you can apply a lot of those lessons just to life, not just real estate.
So you mentioned college. This is kind of a two-part question. One, someone who wants to invest in real estate or wants to be a real estate agent, would you advise them to go to college? One, and well, answer that first.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting question. I was just telling you all about the conversation I had with my wife on the way here about her conversation with our daughter. And I have an MBA. I went to undergrad in business. I got my master's while I was working at Rubbermaid, an executive master's program. And I like school. I'm very educationally minded. I think education is highly important. I have been probably a little overly critical of college, especially to my kids. I'm like, you don't need to go to college. You can, do whatever like go to Votech school, do something that adds value. College is overrated. And so my daughter now is like 15 and a half, and she's like, I'm never going to college and all this stuff. And I'm like, maybe I overdid that a little bit, So my wife was saying that she was talking about college because she's always been like, I'm not going to college, And I've always been kind of proud of that until last year or so. I've been like, maybe I oversold that. Like, she's really, really smart. She could easily get TOPS and go for free to Southeastern and live like right there, So I think about college. What I've always told people is, don't go to college unless you know exactly what you want to do and you need a degree to do it. I think I would caveat that now by saying, like, if you can go to college for free with TOPS, like, college isn't a bad thing to have under your belt. I don't need an MBA or even an undergrad degree to do what I do. And actually, I'm probably about 10 payments away from paying off college debt. I went out of state. I didn't get TOPS. And I was fine with that. I loved my college experience. Had an awesome time at a small Christian college in Tennessee, and really a blast. I wouldn't have traded that for the world. However, I don't look at that as like part of my business decision. That was a good business decision. That was like for me personally, and it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot, and I grew a lot personally, and that's worth investing in. But I think a lot of people graduate from college with a lot of debt and not a lot else to show for it, and they can't go get a job. So I think college is a valuable piece, but I certainly don't think it's a necessity. You don't need it to own your own business. So that's a little bit of a mixed bag. I think it kind of depends. I hope Maddie goes to college just because I think it could be a good opportunity for her. And it's hard to think of your 15-and-a-half-year-old like hitting the streets at 18 and going out and get a job and like starting to provide for herself. And I'm like, oh, but maybe I'm contributing to the babyfication of like the, they wait until 18 instead of 18 until 22 and a half or whatever. So anyway, I think college has its place. I loved it. I learned a lot, so.
I have 2 more questions, and then we'll get to some audience questions. Do you have advice for someone just starting out in real estate investing? Looking to do their first deal.
Yeah, buy something. Just do it. Yesterday's retail is today's bargain, and today's retail is tomorrow's bargain. So I know enough to know that real estate doesn't always go up, but I also know enough that if you bought at the very top of the 2008 market, 10 years later you were fine. It came back, and it's gone up since then. So I think time is your friend. It's like planting a tree. The sooner you can do it, the better. Use whatever means necessary. I know Courtney has a lot of great advice, and Cole, they have a lot of great advice on how to get in with no money down. There are ways, if you have the will to do it, there are ways you can figure out a way to get into real estate. I'm a big fan of HELOCs on your primary residence, using that. I do have a great bought a house on a credit card story. So you know those 0% APR transfer balance things they always send you? Well, I had this credit card that I had for a while, and it was $20,000 was the limit. And I didn't use it. I've always paid off my credit cards completely. I don't carry balances. And so, my rich dad, Biff Genda, who lives in Virginia, he kind of helped me get started in real estate, but he said, he was telling me about this transfer balance deal, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. So I had like $5,000 saved up, and I found this house in Hammond, right next to Tangi Industrial, and it was like a rundown house, and I negotiated with the guy, and he was going to sell it to me for $25,000. So I put $5,000 down from my savings, and I wrote the transfer balance check for $20,000, and it was 0 APR for a year. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. So I paid it, and then I think later on I refied it to pay off the credit card. I forgot what the question was. Sorry.
Advice for someone starting out.
Oh yeah. So I think where I was going with that was there are ways to figure out ways to find money, seller financing, house on a credit card. You know, you can go knock doors. You can do tax sale research. Like there's lots of different ways, but just get creative and just try to pick one and stick to it and do it consistently. So if you do something 15 times, you're going to be way better than if you just did it once, right? And so I think there's a lot to be said for just doing the same thing over and over, because you will, that consistency will provide results.
Now, I like to ask people this, not to get people scared of investing or anything, but just because looking back, sometimes it's funny. Do you have any nightmare stories? With 150, right, you have to.
Yeah,
so you have nightmare stories.
I got lots of them, but the one that sticks out in my head was that house by Tangi Industrial, the house on a credit card house. So when I first bought it, I kind of did not really a great renovation job. This is back when I was still buying like ghetto property and because it was cheap. And so before I was quite finished renovating it, even the halfway renovation I was doing, a lady came and she was like shady as all get out, but she was like, oh, I need a place to stay, and all the stories, and so I let her move in. She had a blind daughter or something like that, sob story, tugging my heartstrings, and after a few months, wasn't long, she stopped paying rent, and she, every time I'd show up, she'd be crying, and her daughter would be there, and I would just be like, oh man, I can't do anything. Well, eventually, and we're talking about 6 months no paid rent, eventually I was like, all right, it's got to be end, I got to get out. And she was always so sweet and nice to me, and so working me, and when I finally did the eviction, went to eviction court, showed up with the marshal to evict her, it was her and several members of her family, and my dad came and helped me. We had to move her out, physically, and the house was not real big, but every single room was chest deep in clothes and toys and food. Oh, it was so gross. And me and my dad carrying out handful. I remember roaches crawling on me. It was terrible. It was terrible. The whole time, this woman and her family, the marshal's standing there to make sure there's no physical, violence, but not from us. I wouldn't have done anything, of course, but she and several of her family members just hurling curse words at us and threats and y'all terrible. The whole time we're moving out there, crap and food on the side. That's the worst, man. I was that's emblazoned in my memory. I'm I'm never buying ghetto property again. I was this is it, So anyway, that's a worst one by far. But
that was how long ago was that?
Couple months.
No. It was. I don't know. I lose track of time. It was probably 10 years ago or so. Yeah, maybe longer. Maybe like 12 or 13.
So are you open to taking some audience questions?
Absolutely.
All right. Anybody have any questions?
So.
Will, how did you make out through the COVID? Reason why I'm asking, I had a gentleman that was part of the No Rear group over in Metairie, and he had four fourplex. I went over, this was in January, went over, looked at the properties, started trying to get my financing together, and COVID hit in March.
Wow.
And he lost all of his tenants, and I was like 3 weeks away from closing.
Ooh.
And I bailed
Uh-huh.
because he lost his whole package.
Yeah.
And it's like, and how many other owners of property, you know, COVID was pretty bad in that area because university shut down the university
Yeah.
and they sent all the kids home.
Right. Yeah, COVID was a very interesting time, and I was sweating for a little while. It's like I always thought real estate and rental property was like fail safe because everybody needs a place to stay until the government says they don't have to pay their rent, and then like and if you have 2 or 3 rentals, like you might be all right, but if you've got 100, you're like, oh my God. So it was interesting because I didn't give any of my tenants any kind of, I said, listen, this is it. Like, I still got a mortgage to pay, and then the mortgage companies gave you the deferrals. You know, I don't know if y'all know that, but all my mortgage companies reached out and said, hey, do you need a deferral? So they gave us 90-day deferrals, so you didn't have to pay my mortgage for 90 days. Most of the tenants kept paying, and the ones that could, I made. The ones that couldn't, I worked with. Then the government, don't get me started, the government, while they were mandating that that people didn't have to pay their rent, they came out and said, well, we'll pay your rent for you, you know? There were...
So that was FEMA money?
I think it was FEMA. There was all kind of... So fast forward, to answer your question, COVID may have been the best financial thing that ever happened to me, to be honest, because not only did I get deferrals on substantial loans, like, you know, tens of thousands of dollars a month that I didn't have to pay, most of which I still collected rent on. The rent that I didn't have to collect, the government came and subsidized and repaid, even in arrears, a lot of those people. Then there were all these EIDL loans, economic injury disaster loans, that before all the government money started flowing and we knew that we were getting paid back, we could apply for loans that were like ultra low interest loans. And so I got some of those loans, and those were great loans that I ended up being able to float my business with and later buy real estate really cheap with, you know. Some of those payments were deferred until last year on the loans.
Really?
So 0 payment, I got to go buy real estate. So I say that in illustration of my point earlier of like, in every challenge there lies an opportunity. I mean, for crying out loud, like it looked really scary, but I thought, what if the bottom falls out? Well, the bottom fell out, you know, not only then, but then in Ida, it fell out again. I was still fine, you know. So the insurance situation, I'll let you know in a year or two. Hopefully, I'll be having the same conversation. It was awesome, you know.
You mentioned the insurance on bigger pockets, like less than a month ago, they had an insurance company that's licensed in 50 states, and they're a vendor. Go to Bigger Pockets under the vendors and look. I can send it to you because I tagged it myself, and they're licensed in 50 states. So it's something definitely to look at.
Yeah, I'll check that out.
It's Bigger Pockets, but it's one of their vendors for the insurance.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that.
Any other questions? Yes?
You named a book that taught you about leverage, and I missed the title of it. Can you tell me?
Yeah, The Millionaire Real Estate Agent. It's by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. And I've read that book 11 times. And it's geared specifically toward real estate agents and building a real estate business. But as an entrepreneur, like I quickly realized when I read that book, I was a real estate agent for 6 years and about to get out at the time when I read it. because I just had too much going on, and I had to choose between like having a life and knowing my kids or getting out of real estate is the way I thought I had to. But then I read that book. In fact, John Exnicius appears again. He's the one who kind of convinced me to go to Keller Williams and really change my life, at the risk of sounding cheesy. But that book helped me understand how to implement leverage into my real estate business. But then it really is a great business book about how to implement leverage in any situation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Since duplexes are so hard to find, if you're just starting out, what price point do you think is that sweet spot where you're not too much on the lower end but affordable, or to receive income that you wouldn't have to be chasing?
So right now, I think you're familiar with the 1% rule. So like 1% of the purchase price in monthly income. That's where I've always like tried to stay. Right now, that's real hard to find. So I would probably go over that a little bit. So in other words, I might buy a duplex for $250 that I'm only getting like $2,200 a month rent, like $1,100 per side. And I'm actually trying right now to involve my kids in some of our real estate deals. Like I want to have, by 18, I want to have my daughter, who's 15 and a half now, I want to buy something with her, or really kind of, she's going to buy it, but I'm going to have a place that, I've got all my kids convinced that on their 18th birthday they're moving out, and so I don't have my wife convinced of that yet, but I'm working on it, and I'm still trying to convince myself a little bit too. But
Good luck.
yeah. So I'm just trying to set the expectation now. But anyway, so but I feel like if she's 18 and she's got a duplex or a fourplex, then she'll have one place to move into, and she still can cash flow it.
That's great.
Fourplex will work better than a duplex.
Oh yeah.
Because she could almost be 100% free
Yeah.
for a fourplex.
Yeah.
The numbers on a four is really well.
Yeah. We've already went and looked at a couple things that I'd like to try and get her into. So
So if you can't find the duplex and you're just gonna get a home, what price point should that home be?
you mean for
Just
rental
you're gonna buy a
property?
rental house.
Okay.
Buy a house you're gonna rent out. The 300,000, 400,000?
So I prefer like the lower end, not as far as condition and like not like ghetto property, but the smaller the space, I think the better rent per square foot you're gonna get. So I would stay like in the 2-bedroom, or I like 3 bedrooms because they're easy to resell, right? Because there's always gonna be a retail market for a single family home. For investors, a fourplex, usually homeowners are not buying fourplexes. Usually it's an investor, so the numbers have to work. So you're always going to be capped on capital appreciation on multifamily. But I'm a buy and hold guy, so I don't care. I'm buying just multifamily. The other thing I learned from a mentor of mine, anybody know who Ed Hoover is in Hammond? He buys a lot of big commercial real estate. Anyway, he's an older guy. But his concept is, and this is like a big deal mentality, he says if you go to an auction and try to buy a $50,000 house, there's going to be 500 people there trying to buy a $50,000 house. If you go to an auction for $1 million hotel, there's going to be maybe 2 people there. You're going to get a much better deal on a bigger deal because there are fewer big fish that can handle that deal. And so you might get the $50,000 house for $50,000 or might have to bid it up to 60 or whatever. You're going to get that $1 million deal for like 600,000. That's a good deal. Now, you have to have the wherewithal to make that float for a little while, maybe. But the bigger the risk, the bigger the reward. That doesn't exactly answer your question, Michelle, about rental property, but that's just a nugget I thought I'd share because that's a really good, like, I've recognized the bigger the deals, the fewer the buyers, and you can get a better deal on that,
What are your thoughts on reserves? What do you like to have for a property?
I think it's good to have, now I think it's good to have like 6 months, but like, if you'd asked me about reserves when I started, I'd been like, reserves, what are you talking about?
6 days?
Yeah. I don't know where it's coming from tomorrow, but like I said, I'm naturally very risk averse. I have a lot more to lose now than I had then, so, yeah. Yeah.
As we start to wrap it up, any final questions, anybody? All right. I want to give you a chance to plug, so you have a podcast, you want to plug all your stuff?
Yeah, so, so Will Frederick Real Estate, with the top agent in Hammond for several years running, or one of the top. I do sell all over the North Shore, so if you know anybody who wants to buy, sell, or invest in real estate, love to help you there. Looking for buyer's agents for my team. If anyone is interested or knows somebody who's a hustler, you don't have to be a real estate agent. We can get you licensed. Looking for buyer's agents to service buyers on my team. We're growing. The Will Frederick Podcast was birthed out of everybody, or lots of people were like, "Hey, Will, I want to take you to coffee and talk about real estate," and I love doing that. I would do that all the time, but I had to stop doing that as much. But this was a way for me to kind of disseminate some of the information that I know, and so it's really meant to be valuable for people, teaching them how to build wealth through investing in real estate. So check it out. I mean, it's not like Bigger Pockets level or anything, but it's very personalized. Like I share a lot of this. This felt like one of my podcast episodes today. This is how I roll with it. The construction company, if we're not really big, and we're actually kind of have a lot going on right now, but you have construction needs. Will Frederick Construction, real creative name. Rent Louisiana is our rental property management company. I think that's it. I don't think I'm forgetting anything.
Can y'all raise and level houses?
No. Well, that would be a Dan question. Well, it depends. Is it a raised house already? Yeah, we could probably level it. Yeah, I can give you my construction manager's name and ask him. So.
Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap things up? No?
Nope.
All right.
Thank
We
you all
give
for
Will
having
a
me.
round of applause.
Yeah.